We are live on Facebook. For those of you joining us on Facebook, this is going to be another big, heavy meeting, a lot of information. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll be able to watch it again to catch some of the more important points. Ian asked a question last week about the nature of the word carbon. Unfortunately, Mr. Gurdjieff told Uspensky he would explain it, but they never spent long enough together. And carbon is when he talks about carbon, that represents the active element. So a hydrogen can be active, passive, or reconciling. So when he uses the word carbon, it's the active form of the hydrogen. When he uses the word oxygen, it's the passive form. And when he uses the word nitrogen, it is the reconciling form. But why he uses those specific elements, I'm not sure. So how is everyone today? How are you doing, Hisham, in Morocco in North Africa?
Well, everything is fine. This week has been good for me. I have felt very energetic and good. Yes, that's about it.
Okay. Angelica, how are things in Sao Paulo, Brazil?
Chaotic.
Chaotic, okay.
It's chaotic, but okay.
That's Brazil and Brazilians. They're not linear. They're just all over the place. And
oh yes, no, but it's okay. I'm here busy. Next weekend, it's the opening for my exhibition in São Paulo City,
yeah.
And I have almost all read for this. So that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, good luck in the art exhibit. And are you showing all of the work that you have available, or it's just select work?
No, I will have two exhibitions. One in São Paulo and with I think 28 artworks, and the other is here nearby. Is 4 artworks in canvas and I guess 10 very big artworks in especially the tissue, fabric.
Okay.
It's 5 meters high for 3 meters. And
okay, that's quite big.
yeah, then the space for the exhibition is really nice. It's very big.
That's good. Okay. Well, good luck with that. And Ian, how are things in Portland, Oregon? How's the weather there?
It's not as bad as it could be. It's pretty dark and wet. My computer is a little slow today, so if I drop off or something, that's what's going on.
Yeah, your image looks a little. It looks like there's kind of mist, or it's not as clear as it is in the past. So, I don't know. Oh, it's clearer now. It is okay. You must have had something on it. Maybe it was just cold and condensing. Now, I notice Karen's coming online. Brian, how are things in Scottsdale, Arizona?
Good. Everything's going really good. Last week I had some, we were talking on the group chat about the whole topic of money, and I think it was, through self-observation. I always knew I had kind of problems with it, but the self-observation really makes you want to, get things in order.
Yeah.
So, with the help of the group, it's something I'm really, focused on now. Just kind of cleaning up finances, and it's feeling that resistance of like sitting down and looking at that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of strange to feel your attention struggle to stay with it, but it's going to take a little time, but I'm going to be dedicated to stick with it.
Yeah. I'm tormented by Mr. Gurdjieff's aphorism. When you go on a spree, go the whole hog, including the postage. So that means all the fine details and all the little things, and you've got to do it all. When you do something, you do it fully and completely. Okay, I noticed Karen's joined us, and Ian has kind of disappeared again. Hopefully he can hear us. He said he's having internet connections. This is going to be a continuation of what I was talking about last week. There's a lot of material to cover. I'm just going to share my screen. So to remind us that this work, we do it for ourselves, we do it for mankind, and we do it for the earth herself. And Mr. Gurdjieff's wish. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. So just become aware of your body. Become aware of the sensation of your body. And I would like you to just, following your own natural rhythm, just breathe in to the very top of your head. And as you breathe out, just send a warm and gentle wave of relaxation all the way down your body to the bottom of your feet. Just breathing in and then relaxing your body a little deeper as you breathe out. And then breathing in, and let's just relax the forehead, relax the eyebrows, relax the eyes, just moving down, relaxing the face, the mouth, the jaw, the chin, relaxing the neck and throat, relaxing your upper torso, upper arms, the lower torso, lower arms, hands and fingers, relaxing your buttocks, relaxing your upper legs, knees, lower legs, ankles, feet, top and bottom of your feet, your toes and heels. Mr. Gurdjieff says that the ability to relax is a prerequisite for inner work. Sometimes we subconsciously or unconsciously hold tension in our body, and this blocks our ability to do some very important inner work. So again, just breathe into the top of your head and then just relax your body as you breathe out. You should try to get so good at this that you can sit in a chair or even walking down the street. Just breathe in and then relax your body as you breathe out to get into that state of relaxation within the body. This is something I'll be going into. Hopefully I'll get to it during this meeting about how we hold unnecessary tension in our body, and it's a way that we waste energy. Now, getting back to what we talked about last week, and I will be going through this again, self-remembering involves first holding in the background of our awareness the sensation of self, the awareness of our physical body. So we need to practice self-sensing, and for some people, they may have to self-sense for a while in order to develop this ability to hold it in the back of their awareness so that you can remain aware of the sensation of self, remain aware of your physical body. So just try your best to hold this awareness of your physical body just sort of in the background. And try to do this throughout your day. If you're walking down the street, if you're sitting down, if you're standing up, if you're getting into your car or you're sitting on a bus or the subway, try to bring your awareness back to your physical body, back to this organic awareness of our physical self as often as you can. Develop it like developing a muscle. And so holding the sensation of self in the background of our awareness, become aware of your eyes. Become aware physically of your eyes receiving light. Become aware of receiving photons, visual information, colors, shapes, forms coming into your eyes. Be aware that your eyes are receiving information. If you've never done this before, you can actually think the words, my eyes are seeing. But ultimately, you just want to have that awareness that your eyes are seeing, that you are receiving visual information. Then become aware of your ears. Become aware of your ears receiving sounds. The sound of my voice. Perhaps any background sounds wherever you are, maybe the hum of your computer. Become aware of your ears receiving sound. Then become aware of your nose receiving scents, odors. Perhaps there's a specific smell in the room. Perhaps you can smell your own scent. Become aware of your nose receiving olfactory information. And then become aware of your taste buds receiving taste. There's always a taste in our mouth, but we're normally not aware of it. So become aware of your mouth, of the taste buds in your mouth, receiving this gustatory information, the taste. And then, depending on your ability, try to become aware of your eyes seeing and the visual information entering into your eyes, while also becoming aware of your ears hearing and the auditory information coming into your ears, while also aware of your nose receiving olfactory information, smells coming into your nose, while also being aware of your taste buds tasting. So with full mindful awareness, become aware of what you see, hear, smell, and taste. And as you become aware of what you see, hear, smell, and taste, become aware. Also hold in the back of your awareness this sensation of self. Make sure that you are part of your observations. If you just observe what you see, or just observe what you hear, or smell, or taste, without that sensation of self, without that awareness of yourself, you are not part of your observations. And this is what self-remembering is. It's an awareness of me here in this environment. And here, it's what I see, what I hear, what I smell, and what I taste. So those are coming in as new impressions, while also being aware of the physical body, sensing the body while you do this. And there's a slightly more advanced form of self-remembering where you also become aware of what you're feeling. And it's an attempt to bring in a degree or a dollop of joy into this experience. And when we engage in that higher form of self-remembering, in that moment when we are able to engage all three brains, the head brain through looking, listening, smelling, tasting, the body brain through sensing, and the feeling brain through feeling. In that moment, we are three-brained beings, and we take our rightful place as human beings rather than machines. Now, this is a skill we need to develop. It's something that doesn't just happen right away. We've got to work at it. And Mr. Gurdjieff said, remember yourself always and everywhere. So you can do this walking down the street. You can do it sitting on a bus. You can do it standing in a line. You can do it eating. And eating is actually a very important place, according to Mr. Gurdjieff, to bring this awareness, to become aware of ourself eating. And he really didn't like the idea of eating and talking. He said it was a sacred time for the transformation of substances, and we really should be focused as mindfully as we can, with as full a degree of self-remembering as we can when we eat. So again, just become aware of your eyes seeing, become aware of the visual information coming into your eyes, become aware of your ears hearing, the auditory information coming into your ears, your nose smelling, your taste buds tasting, and recognize that you are feeding through this process. Normally we feed mechanically, but if we become mindful of it, we are no longer machines just feeding mechanically on the impressions that come from outside of ourselves. Then we step up to the state beyond machines. We step up and become proper human beings. And then let's just finish and do the collected state. You know, as the earth has an atmosphere, so too do we have an atmosphere. So collect your atmosphere, keep it around you. Do not let it get dispersed through thoughts, through emotions, through sensations. Draw your atmosphere in towards you. And in a moment, when I count from 1 to 3, breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine that something settles. Something, the emanations that you breathe in, settle somewhere inside you and coat and help to grow your inner being. 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in, and as you breathe out, imagine something remains. And then just quietly, silently repeat after me, may results from this exercise be transformed in me, or transubstantiated in me for my being. And it's always good when you do some kind of a formal practice to end with the kind of affirmation. And that's the one Mr. Gurdjieff recommended. Now I'm going to share my screen again. So some of this I did last week and talked about, but it's worth kind of repeating. Every normal man has quite enough energy to begin work on himself. It is only necessary to learn how to save the greater part of the energy we possess for useful work instead of wasting it unproductively. Energy is spent chiefly on unnecessary and unpleasant emotions, the expectation of unpleasant things possible and impossible, on bad moods, on unnecessary haste, nervousness, irritability, imagination, daydreaming, and so on. Energy is wasted on the wrong work of centers, on unnecessary tension of muscles all out of proportion to the work produced, on perpetual chatter, which absorbs an enormous amount of energy, on the interest continually taken in things happening around us or to other people and having, in fact, no interest whatsoever, on the constant waste of the force of attention, and so on. So we are dirty machines. We are not doing things properly. It's like we've got dirt in the oil system of our car, and the filters aren't clean, and so we're not filtering proper air. And so the first step is really learning how to clean the machine, how to tune the machine up so that it's working optimally. And there's a few other ways that we do not work optimally. That's where the machine is very dirty for us. And so we've got to fix that. We've got to clean it up. We've got to replace the filters. We've got to do an oil change. We've got to put a better fuel into the fuel tank, and so on, getting our machine so that it is working optimally. The work of the factory consists in transforming one kind of matter into another, namely the coarser matters in the cosmic sense into finer ones. The factory receives as raw material from the outer world a number of coarse hydrogens and transforms them into finer hydrogens by a means of a whole series of complicated alchemical processes. But in the ordinary conditions of life, the production by the human factory of finer hydrogens, in which, from the point of view of the possibility of higher states of consciousness and the work of higher centers, we are particularly interested, is insufficient, and they are all wasted on the existence of the factory itself. If we could succeed in bringing the production up to its possible maximum, we should then begin to save the fine hydrogens. Then the whole body, all of the tissues, all of the cells would become saturated with these fine hydrogens, which would gradually settle in them, crystallizing in a special way. This crystallization of the fine hydrogens would gradually bring the whole organism onto a higher level, onto a higher plane. Mr. Gurdjieff says we have to grow our inner being. This is not a metaphor. He's speaking in very real terms. We have to grow our essence. We have to grow our Kesdjan body. And one of the first things we have to do is we have to engage in self-study. We have to observe our human machine and find those places where it's dirty, where it's leaking energy, where it's wasting energy. If we think of ourselves as a factory, perhaps the manager is really upset because his wife is having an affair. And because he's really upset and angry, the people on the production line realize that they can slack off. And so they're doing all sorts of movements and things that they don't need to do in order to produce the goods the factory is producing. And, the whole factory is not producing what it's supposed to be producing. All of the money, all of the expenditure, all of the investment in the factory is just keeping the factory going without it producing what it should really begin producing. Moreover, as has already been said, lower centers work in a wrong way, for very often, instead of their own proper functions, one or another of them takes upon itself the work of other centers. This considerably reduces the speed of the general work of the machine and makes acceleration of the work of centers very difficult. Thus, in order to regulate and accelerate the work of the lower centers, the primary object must consist in freeing each center from work foreign and unnatural to it, and in bringing it back to its own work, which it can do better than any other center. For those of you who have learned to drive, driving is a moving center phenomenon. The moving center is what really masters the ability to drive. So we can think about things and whatever, and our body drives the car. But when you first learn to drive, you use the thinking center, you use the intellectual center. And so your movements were jerky, they were hesitant, they were slow. And this is an example of the wrong work of centers. How when one center does the work that is more natural and fitting another center, it's like this really jerky connection and doing things improperly. Now, to learn to drive a car, you first have to learn it with the mind. This is the steering wheel, the brake, the gas pedal, doing various things, and your initial movements are hesitant. But eventually the moving center takes over. And when the moving center learns to drive the car, your movements are smooth, fluid. You don't really even have to think about it. So that's just sort of a metaphor, an example of what happens when one center does the work of another center. The intellectual center, according to Mr. Gurdjieff, works with hydrogen-48. The lower part of the emotional center is supposed to work with hydrogen-24. It's a complete different order of energy. It's twice as high, twice as refined, twice as vibrant. But when we try to think with the feeling center, we slow the work of the feeling center down. When we try to feel with the mind, we are trying to speed it up and do a task that it's not suited for. And so the wrong work of centers is also a way that we do not function properly. Feeling brain is a brain. The intellectual center is a brain. The physical is a brain. Mr. Gurdjieff said the intellectual center, engages in comparisons and contrasting. So you can go to the grocery store and you pick up an apple and you pick up a pear, and you can compare the apple to the pear. This is red, this is green. You can compare and contrast them. The feeling center, which do I feel like? Do I feel like an apple? Do I feel like a pear? And it's important to begin to classify things. This is an intellectual center activity. This is a feeling center activity. This is a moving center activity. This is an instinctual center activity. Seeing on the screen the words in white, the words in yellow, and the black background, that's the instinctual center. There is no value judgment, no feeling, no intellectual connection with it. That comes, the ability to perceive color comes from the instinctual center. So to begin classifying what we are focusing on, is this comparison, contrasting? Am I feeling my way towards an understanding? Is this my moving center, such as walking or standing or sitting or lying down? Is this my instinctual center, the instinctual awareness of colors? And so to begin doing that kind of self-study, to begin looking at the ways that we are doing things incorrectly. A great deal of energy is also spent on work which is completely unnecessary and harmful in every respect, such as on the activity of unpleasant emotions, on the expression of unpleasant sensations, on worry, on restlessness, on haste, and on a whole series of automatic actions which are completely useless. As many examples as you like can be found of such unnecessary activity. First of all, there is the constant moving flow of thoughts in our mind, which we can neither stop nor control, and which takes up an enormous amount of our energy. As an aside here, I shared, I'm just going to stop this for a second. I shared on Facebook an exercise where you touch your index finger twice, once, twice, once, twice, once, twice. And there's a number sequence to go along with this. If you've ever engaged in Gurdjieff counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4. This is actually an exercise that can productively use the churning of the intellectual center. Mr. Gurdjieff also recommended to some of his students that they carry beads like a rosary or the mala beads, and that they use them to specifically train that churning of the head brain so that it's doing something more productive. He also recommended to students, learning 50 words in a foreign language a day. You've got to use, the head brain's going to think, it's going to associate, it's going to churn. Why not turn it into a water wheel and make it do some useful, productive activity instead of just thinking about what Sue said to Mary last night on the TV show and engaging in all of this unnecessary stuff, to actually begin to use that. And Aora Raj had a number of exercises for the mind, but the most basic one was 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3. And it's a sequence that can go on, and it really works with the hands. And then with the hands, it's much harder for me to show it, but you can do it so your index finger and baby finger, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. And so you don't do the mirror image, you do the opposite as you work through the hands. And you can switch it so that you start with the index finger and the baby finger of one hand and then switch it over when you get comfortable. This is moving center work. When you do it with the numbers are the intellectual center. You can do this on a bus, you can do it wherever you are, and it's a way to connect two brains together, to do two-brained activity, and it's also a way to stop that useless chattering in the mind by using the mind in a productive way. So the constantly moving flow of thoughts in our mind, we can actually begin to channel that into a more productive way. Secondly, there is the quite unnecessary constant tension of the muscles of our organism. And this is why I did that relaxation. You should be able to just relax your body in the space of 2 to 3 seconds. You should practice it until you can do it. This unnecessary constant tension of muscles of our organisms. The muscles are tense even when we are doing nothing. As soon as we start to do even a small and insignificant piece of work, a whole system of muscles necessary for the hardest and most strenuous work is immediately set in motion. We pick up a needle from the floor and we spend on this action as much energy as is needed to lift up a man of our own weight. We write a short letter and use as much muscular energy upon it as would suffice to write a bulky volume. But the chief point is that we spend muscular energy continually and at all times, even when we are doing nothing. When we walk, the muscles of our shoulders and arms are tensed unnecessarily. When we sit, the muscles of our legs, neck, back, and stomach are tensed in an unnecessary way. We even sleep with the muscles of our arms, of our legs, of our face, of the whole of our body tensed. And we do not realize that we spend much more energy on this continual readiness for work we shall never do than an all the real useful work during our life. I know that I've caught myself washing dishes with my jaw. I mean, what does my jaw have to do with scrubbing a dish? I don't have a dishwasher, so I wash the dishes by hand. There's no connection. And we just keep ourselves tense. This also actually leads into another aside. Mr. Gurdjieff told J.G. Bennett, and it's in J.G. Bennett's book, Transformations, that we should consciously relax the 200 main muscles in our body before we go to bed. J.G. Bennett said it's best to do this sitting in a chair or we will fall asleep. And on the YouTube channel, that will be posted with this video, and that's on the link on Facebook. There's an exercise for deep relaxation that includes a draining exercise that was taught by Willem Nyland. And this is an exercise to get the body completely relaxed. Mr. Gurdjieff said we sleep too much. Only 4.5 hours of sleep are really necessary. But because we go to sleep holding on to all of this unconscious tension in our bodies, one of our sleep cycles is devoted to the subconscious mind attempting to relax the body. And Mr. Gurdjieff said we have to learn to do subconscious things consciously to harmonize the two minds. So if before we go to sleep, we consciously and deliberately relax the body from head down to the bottom of our feet and then go to sleep, we will eliminate the need for one sleep cycle and require less sleep at night. Still further, we can point to the habit of continually talking with anybody about anything, or if there is no one else, with ourselves. My mother loved to chatter. No one was around. She would talk to her cat. She would talk to her plants. From the moment she woke up to when she went to bed, she had to chatter. And if you were around, the chatter was directed at you. If there was no one around, it was completely useless chattering. And it goes on in our head. It goes on when we talk to people. You know, we just chatter, 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 chatter mechanically, without any conscious awareness or deliberation. The habit of indulging in fantasies, in daydreaming. And here, there is something called active being mentation. There is, you know, the words and picture maker in the head, the ability to visualize things. At the lower level is daydreaming, but at the higher level, it's active being mentation, where rather than just indulging in these fantasies and getting caught up in these flights of fantasies, we are using this faculty productively, properly, to perhaps imagine doing an exercise or to visualize something that we would like to recreate in our mind and whatever. Mr. Gurdjieff actually recommended developing our ability to picture things. He taught this to the ladies of the rope. Look at something, look at an object, look at a room, and then shut your eyes and try to recreate visually everything you saw, and then open your eyes and compare the internal recreation, and then do it again until you start getting better and better at it. And he made the aside that through the focus of his mind, he could kill a yak. A yak is sort of a Tibetan animal, and I think this is more metaphorical than real. But he's talking about this ability to focus this faculty properly, rather than just indulging in reverie and daydreams and flights of fancy, to begin to utilize this ability to visualize and begin to train this. So to look at an object or to look at a scene close your eyes, recreate it in your mind, open, and see if you can do it, if you've got it. I know another book I read, someone talked about something similar, and he said, look at a picture. Memorize the picture, close your eyes, recreate it in your mind, look at the picture, see where you missed, and then recreate it again, and develop this ability. The continual change of mood, feelings, and emotions. So we're just like this revolving door of eyes, and our moods, our feelings, our emotions are continually changing. An enormous number of quite useless things which a man considers himself obliged to feel, think, do, or say. In order to regulate and balance the work of the three centers whose functions constitute our life, it is necessary to learn to economize the energy produced by our organism, not to waste this energy on unnecessary functions, and to save it for that activity which will gradually connect the lower centers with the higher. We must not forget that our machine is so constructed that there are not, and this, what I've just read came from In Search of the Miraculous. This comes from C.S. Knott. I think I read this quote 2 meetings ago when I was talking about identification and internal considering, but it bears repeating here. We must not forget that our machine is so constructed, and this is C.S. Knott quoting Mr. Gurdjieff, so constructed that there are not different places for different experiences at one and the same time. In us, there is only one place, this he said emphatically, where an experience can occur. If this place is occupied by one kind of experience and an undesirable one, it cannot be occupied at the same time by an experience of another and desirable kind. So if you're walking down the street and you're thinking about what Mary said to Sue at that party last night, you can't be present here in this moment. You can't see what's going on. You can't really exist in that moment. You're trapped in these old impressions and these things that are going on in your mind. So it's all about the power of our attention. Mr. Gurdjieff said, the power of attention is one of the most sacred gifts that we have. And a moment of inattention where we squander our attention can never be regained. It's like pouring from the empty to the void. And it is only through the harnessing of this power of our attention that we grow. So again, coming back to In Search of the Miraculous, it must be noted, oh no, this is, I believe, from Views from the Real World. Or is it? We'll figure out at the end. It must be noticed that the organism usually produces in the course of, this is In Search of the Miraculous, in the course of one day, all of the substances necessary for the following day. And it very often happens that all these substances are spent or consumed upon some unnecessary and, as a rule, unpleasant emotion. Bad moods, worry, the expectation of something unpleasant, doubt, fear, a feeling of injury, irritation. Each of these emotions, in reaching a certain degree of intensity, may in half an hour or even half a minute consume all of the substances prepared for the next day. Think about this. Someone says something and you explode. You may feel righteous indignation or whatever, but in that explosion, you have used up in half a minute all of the energy that you should have saved for the next day. While a single flash of anger or some other violent emotion can at once explode all the substances prepared in the laboratory and leave a man quite empty inwardly for a long time. And this is terrifying, or even forever. I'm a hypnotherapist. I'm a therapist. I talk to people for 90 minutes and then use hypnosis for an hour. I've had people who they just cannot get over a divorce of, their spouse cheating on them. They get so blown up by that one experience in their life and they're not able to let go and detach from it. And they just burn up that experience day after day after day, for a long time, possibly forever. Something happens, someone offends us, we no longer want to talk to a family member or whatever, and we obsess and obsess and obsess for years about that event, and we waste all of that energy and any possibility of inner growth. So it's best to just release things, to let go. Let me go to the next. This is also something that's quite frightening. Children receive new impressions, but older people cannot. And I believe this comes from views from the real world, either that or Gurdjieff's early talks. I think it's views. It's found in both in slightly different versions. I will give you as an example. Each man or woman has his own bodily postures and gestures. These are connected with the mental and emotional habits and features which we cannot see. So to understand this, we must take something that many people do. Observe how people dance. Each nationality, and he was speaking in 1915, 1920, there's been a bit of merging in the world since then, but each nationality has its own way of dancing. You can always tell the nationality by the way a man dances. In the East, where traditions are much stronger, you can even tell which tribe or village people come from by the way they dance. In this way, dance has become like a kind of language by which people, unconsciously, of course, tell us all about themselves. It is the same with everything. Each nation has a limited repertoire of movements which come from the impressions of childhood. Because of this, there is also a limited repertoire of thought. Even the feelings take on their own habitual features, which fix for the whole of the rest of the life, the ways in which a person can feel. After childhood, very little can be changed unless special measures are taken, about which we will talk later. The capacity to get new impressions weakens with age. And just as an aside, I tell my clients that every feeling they feel currently is a re-feeling of something they felt before the age of 8. I don't tell them that Mr. Gurdjieff said that the feeling center and our repertoire of feelings are complete by the age of 8. And we can sort of like a bag where we put a whole bunch of things in up until about the age of 18. We can move things around inside the bag, but we can't add things into the bag. There are ways that things can be added. One is through Gurdjieff movements. The other is through the practice of self-remembering. So for most people, the ability to receive new impressions weaken as they get older. Children receive new impressions, but older people cannot. Therefore, in later life, all that can be experienced is the arousing and recombination of these old impressions from childhood. Really, new impressions can be obtained only by violence because the roles in the centers are already covered up. And movements and other ways we can receive new impressions. It is difficult to penetrate to them because our force is limited. Nevertheless, there always remains in man a place where impressions can be received providing these impressions are taken with a sufficient intensity. And this is self-remembering, the awareness of our eyes receiving information, the awareness of our ears receiving information, the awareness of our nose, our taste buds receiving information while sensing our body. So this place remains free until adult life begins. If it has not received impressions before then, it is very hard to reach. For many of you who are here now, this place is already almost impossible to reach. It will need great effort if you are to begin a new life. Gurdjieff's early talks. Now, this being said, I spent 6 months in connection with a person who was associated with the Willem Nyland group. They have an internet outreach program. This was back in 2003. And on the telephone, he led me through a backdoor experience into self-remembering. And I suddenly had this real intense memory of being 3 years old and self-remembering. So I think, he says our emotions are complete by approximately the age of 8. And so the people who are attracted to these teachings, somehow something happened in childhood. The magnetic center is part of the emotional center. Something was able to develop in us as we were children. And I think if we have a magnetic center, this gives us an advantage when it comes to self-remembering and doing these things, because somehow we learn to do them in childhood. Through hypnosis, I had my son hypnotize me once, and I went back to 19 months old. And I was lying in a crib, and there was this white cloth over the crib. I was born in Africa. It kept the insects away. I had no memory of it, but in that hypnotic regression, I was fully aware of my small body and the intricate pattern of the cloth above me and the light and the weave, and it was an act of self-remembering. So when I thought I was taught to self-remember at the age of 23, I was actually being taught where the switch was and to reactivate something that I had previously learned to do as a child and had forgotten all about. Now, I don't like to normally talk about Beelzebub tales to his grandson, but I've talked about this specific passage in the chapter on form and sequence near the end of the book. And this is describing the process of self-remembering, and it's also describing the way normal people take in normal information so they are unable to receive new impressions properly. Although in respect of the sacred Triya Kamno, that's the law of 3, the process of the arising of both kinds of being reason flows equally. And he's talking about the reason of knowledge and the reason of understanding. Yet the fulfilling factors for the actualization of its 3 separate holy forces are different. Namely, for the formation of the reason of knowing, this is how most people live. The formerly perceived contradictory impressions crystallized in any one of the 3 localizations, which the 3 brain beings have, serve as the affirming and denying factors. So those previous crystallizations within us, we're walking down the street, chattering away in our head, thinking about this or that, and that blocks us from properly receiving new impressions. You know, people say something, we hear something, it tickles some kind of a memory, and that comes up into the place where we should be receiving new impressions. So for the formation of the reason of knowing, the formerly perceived contradictory impressions crystallized in any one of the 3 localizations which 3 brain beings have serve as the affirming and denying factors, and the new impressions proceeding from without serve in this case as the third factor. So if we imagine that we are triangles and the top is 1, over the left is 2, and the third is 3, 1 and 2 are already occupied with what happened within us, and anything that comes in gets slotted into 3 when it really should be coming in at 1. And for the reason of understanding, and don't be misled, this is self-remembering. And for the reason of understanding, these factors are as follows. The first, that is the sacred affirming. So this is the first position. The sacred affirming is the positive element of the law of 3. The sacred affirming, this is our head brain. This is the newly perceived impressions of any localizations which has at the given moment what is called the center of gravity functioning. This is being aware of your eyes seeing, knowing that you are seeing with your eyes, your ears hearing, your nose smelling, your taste buds tasting. And the second, or the sacred denying, and the sacred affirming, the active part of us is the head brain, the denying is the body brain, and the reconciling is the feeling brain. So the sacred affirming is the intellectual center. The sacred denying is the body, the physical center. So, or the second or sacred denying is the corresponding data present in another of his localizations. And this is why at the last meeting, I said that Ouspensky has led to more misunderstanding about the nature of self-remembering by translating a word with the English word feeling when he should have used sensing. This is why becoming aware of what we see, hear, smell, taste, while sensing our body as one organic whole. The becoming aware of what we see, hear, smell, taste is the sacred affirming in this equation. The second, the sacred denying, is that sensation of self in the other corresponding localization, in other words, the body. And the third factor, so this is the reconciling factor, is what is called the being autokololitzikiners. You know, I love the way he invents all these words, or as they otherwise call it, the hu das baboganari, the sense of which the name signifies the results of the persevering actualizing of the striving towards the manifestation of one's own individuality. So here, the receiving of impressions through the head brain, the sacred affirming, what we see, hear, smell, taste. In our second place, in the sacred denying, the body brain, the sensing of ourself. This is the process of self-remembering. And then, you know, if you think of the head brain as the positive end of a battery and the body brain as a negative end of the battery, between these two, a current flows, and that current is the being autokolonitzers, and something else arises within us. Now this I read last week. It has been explained before that in ordinary conditions, we do not remember ourselves. We do not remember, that is, we do not sense, and here I've corrected this text in Ouspensky, sense ourselves and are not aware of ourselves the moment of a perception, of an emotion, of a thought, or of an action. If a man understands this and tries to remember himself, every impression he receives while remembering himself will, so to speak, be doubled. In an ordinary psychic state, I simply look at a street. But if I remember myself, I do not simply look at the street. I sense that I am looking, as though I am saying to myself, I am looking. Instead of one impression of the street, there are two impressions. One of the street and another of myself looking at it. The second impression produced by the fact of my remembering myself is the additional shock. And I'm just going to come over to these diagrams. So self-remembering, we can get very specifically, whoops, I just lost that. We can get very specific in terms of self-remembering involves Law 24 of the octave of food. This is the sensation of self, and it involves Ray 24. And this is the mindful awareness of looking, listening, smelling, and tasting, the body brain and the head brain, by engaging in both. So the head brain is the active, it's the sacred affirming, the body brain is the passive, it is the sacred denying, it is the double impression that we do, bringing this awareness, becoming mindful, aware of our eyes receiving information, our ears, our nose, our taste buds, while sensing our body. And so this is, let me just go back, whoops. So, moreover, it very often happens that the additional sensation connected with self-remembering brings with it an element of emotion. This is where we begin to engage in three-brained self-remembering. Emotion is part of the middle octave, the octave of air. That is, the work of the machine attracts a certain amount of carbon-12 to the place in question. Efforts to remember oneself. One, the observation of oneself at the moment of receiving an impression. That is the sensation of our body as one organic whole. 2A, the observation of one's impressions at the moment of receiving them. So visually, auditorily, olfactory, smelling, gustatory, tasting. 2B, registering, so to speak, the reception of impressions. I'm hearing, I'm smelling, I'm seeing. You don't necessarily need to use the words. There's an awareness beyond the words where you're aware that you are seeing, you're watching that bird, and you're hearing that car, and you're smelling the decaying of the leaves or whatever. The 2C and the simultaneous defining of the impressions received. All this taken together doubles the intensity of the impressions and carries Do 48 to Ray 24. So coming back to here, so we can, whoops, we can see over here in the normal human being, though nothing happens. It just doesn't have the sufficient energy. It doesn't even have the sufficient energy to give the octave of air what it needs. But when we become aware, perceiving through our eyes, aware of our eyes seeing, aware of our hearing, aware of our nose smelling, our taste buds smelling, somehow we bring the necessary carbon in this process to allow Do to develop to Ray, and then it moves up to me. And in doing this, by engaging in this process, we actually give me of the octave of air the energy it needs to continue developing all of its way. So that's sort of the ancient sacred science of transformation. How do I get out of this? So, you know, by doing that, the passage of Do itself enables Do of the third octave impressions to come into contact with me of the second octave of air, and to give this note the requisite amount of energy necessary for the transition of me to Fa. In this way, the shock given to Do extends also to me and enables the second octave to develop. So, just I can show it even more easily. So Mi can then move to Fa, which can move to So, which can move up to La 6. And so with the first conscious shock, La 6 is the highest energy that we naturally produce. So that's what he's really saying here. Now, all the rest of this, hopefully I can get through it in the next 20 minutes, all comes from In Search of the Miraculous. So there are 3 stages. The first stage refers to the work of the human organism as it has been created by nature. That is to say, to the life and functions of man number 1, 2, and 3. The first octave, that is the octave of food, develops in a normal way to Me 192. At this point, it automatically receives a shock, and this is the mechanical shock. So I don't know why my tools are not showing up, but over on the left, Do 192, whoops. Why isn't my, there my tools are, sorry. So Do, air comes in at Do 192. This gives the octave of food the necessary energy it needs to develop all the way up to C12. This is nature's mechanical shock. So 1, the mechanical shock. From the beginning of the second octave and its development goes on consecutively to C12. So sexual energy C12, which has been the nature of various meetings before, is the highest substance naturally produced in a normal human being. Most humans waste it through the misuse of that energy, but it is the highest substance we can naturally produce. The second octave, that is the air octave, begins with Do 92 and develops to Mi 24, where it stops there. And the diagram on the left, you can see air coming in at Do 192 and moving up to Mi 48, where it stops. It needs that outside shock. Thus, 7 notes of the first octave, 3 notes of the second, and 1 note of the third octave represent a complete picture of the human factory in its first natural stage. So this is, the left-hand diagram is 7 notes of the first octave, 3 notes of the second octave, 1 note of the third octave. This is normal human being. Nature provided only 1 shock, that is the shock received from the entrance of the second octave, that's air coming in, which helps Mi of the first octave pass to Fa. And this occurs, Mi is where food is transformed into the duodenum, and in order for it to move to the liver, where blood comes in, it needs air. So air allows food to, and the transformational process to, it, rather than get stuck in the duodenum and we become plants, to allow the octave of food to transform energy, which then is in the liver. And the next stage is the cerebral hemispheres, and then the cerebellum, and finally into the testes, where, the highest energy that a normal human being produces. So number 2, the second stage, the first conscious shock. That is the shock that would help the development of the third octave and thereby enable Mi of the second octave to pass to Fa. And man must create this shock by his own efforts. If he desires to increase the output of fine hydrogens in his organism. This is why there will never be a mass awakening of humanity, and anyone who says that is speaking out their backside. They're just, it's not true. The only way we will evolve is through conscious effort. And I can't make you self-remember. Only you can. It is something that can only happen on an individual by individual basis. Only we ourselves can create this shock for ourselves, and it has to be intentional and deliberate. It cannot be as a result of an accident. So there will never be a mass awakening. People will not accidentally awaken. They have to deliberately engage in this practice. The second stage refers to the work of the human organism when a man creates a conscious volitional shock at the point of Do 48. In the first place, this volitional shock is transmitted to the second octave, which develops as far as So 12, or even further up to La 6, and so on. So going back here to, where are my tools? So he's saying that for most people, if they do self-remembering, they can kind of develop it up to here. They're not able to really push it fully up to La 6. So let me just get rid of that. Whoops. I don't know why it's not getting rid of that. Whoops, and it's still there. Just give me 1 second. It must have been, whoops, oh, sorry. Oh, I think I got rid of it. So in the first place, as far as So 12, and even further up to La 6 and so on, if the work on the organism is sufficiently intense, the same shock also enables the third octave to develop, that is the octave of impressions, which in this event reaches Me 12. Thus, the second stage of the work of the human organism, we see the full development of the second octave and 3 notes of the third octave. The first octave is stopped at the note C12, the third at the note Me 12. Neither of these octaves can proceed any further without a fresh shock. So this picture here in the center represents when it has the octave of air has the sufficient intensity. This is the result of it. So if we compare man as he is and man as he is with the second shock, we can see the development that is possible within us when we engage in self-remembering and do it properly. So the third stage, the second conscious shock. The nature of the second shock cannot be so easily described as the nature of the first volitional shock at Do 48. In order to understand the nature of this shock, it is necessary to understand the meaning of C12 and Me 12. Coming back to the diagram, see where are my controls. I don't know why this is not giving me those controls, sorry. So you can see C. Why isn't this doing this? Sorry, let me just stop this and redo it and see if I can get, oh, there they are. So we have to understand what C12 is. And I've done a number of meetings on the misuse of C12. And then we also have to understand what Me 12 is. In order to move over from this, oops, let me get rid of that, move from this on the left to this on the right, the second conscious shock. Whoops. The effort which creates this shock must consist in work on the emotions, in the transformation and transmutation of emotions. So again, coming back to here, I don't know why I'm not getting the controls. So let me stop sharing this and just pull it back again, and that should give me control. There they are. This means that this is the key. So 12 of the octave of air. That somehow this will provide the shock for me 12, which will provide the shock for C12 to begin the next process of transformation. So the second conscious shock begins with the emotions. And if you recall earlier, I highlighted that section in green, you know, that, I'm not going to go back to it right now because I'll run out of time, where it's the work on the emotions to allow that to happen. This transmutation of the emotions will then help the transmutation of C12 in the human organism. No serious growth, that is, no growth of the higher bodies within the organism is possible without this transmutation. The idea of this transmutation was known to many ancient teachings as well as to some comparatively recent ones, such as the alchemy of the Middle Ages. But the alchemists spoke of this transmutation in the allegorical forms of the transformation of base metals into precious ones. In reality, however, they meant the transformation of coarse hydrogens into finer ones in the human organism, chiefly the transformation of Me12. If this transformation is attained, a man can be said to have achieved what he was striving for. And it can also be said that until this transformation is attained, all results attained by man can be lost, because if they are not fixed in him in any way, moreover, they are attained only in the spheres of thought and emotions. The octave of impressions, thought, head, brain, emotion, the octave of air. Real objective results can be obtained only after the transmutation of Me12 has begun. That is, allowing Me12 to become Do, Re, Mi, Fa, 6. Alchemists who spoke of this transmutation began directly with it. They knew nothing, and this is the actual transmutation of, I believe it's C12. They knew nothing, or at least said nothing, about the nature of the first volitional shock. Oh, they hid that. They kept the first volitional shock hidden. It is upon this, however, the whole thing depends. So it depends on self-remembering properly, understanding how this process fits. The second volitional shock, the second conscious shock, and transmutation become physically possible only after long practice of the first volitional shock, which consists in self-remembering and in observing the impressions received. And I've talked about this next bit in other meetings. On the way of the monk and on the way of the fakir, the work on the second shock begins before the work of the first shock. But as Me12 is created only as a result of the first shock, in the absence of other material, has of necessity to be concentrated on C12. And it is very often gives wrong results. Right development of the fourth way must begin with the first volitional shock, self-remembering, and then pass on to the second shock at Me12. So the way this is hacked is through the monastic way of fleeing from the world, taking monastic vows, shaving your head, putting on saffron-colored robes, taking vows of celibacy and various other vows, and living such a quiet, contemplative life where you stare at a wall perhaps for 30 years and allow everything else to settle down within you. And if you're very lucky, by doing this, you work on solely transforming C12. The whole monastic life, the celibacy, the vows, the saffron robes, the shaving of heads, are all to mitigate the misuse of C12, so you're not blowing up and using that energy like normal people do. And if you're lucky, you may achieve some kind of transformation. But it's not a proper transformation, it's a hack. The proper transformation begins with self-remembering. We do not have to leave the world. We do not have to become celibate and take the vows of the monk. The third stage of the human, in the work of the human organism, begins when man creates in himself a conscious second volitional shock at the point of Me12. When the transformation and transmutation of these hydrogens into higher hydrogens begins in him. The second stage and the beginning of the third stage refer to the life and functions of man number 4. So when you start self-remembering, you will become a man number 4. When you get very good at self-remembering, it's like a continuum, or there's a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si to man number 4. You can become a high man number 4 when you start this transformation of this other process. So transmutation and crystallization is needed for the transition of man number 4 to the level of man number 5. So back in these food diagrams, the second diagram represents man number 4. However, he's struggling to do this. The right-hand diagram represents man number 5. This is the real growth in a human being that takes place on the spiritual path. This is a very ancient science of transformation, and it's why Mr. Gurdjieff didn't cobble together his teachings from here and there and put them all together. He learned this somewhere. I actually believe this goes back to the ancient society of Akkaldans that he talks about in Beelzebub Tales to his grandson, the ancient science of transformation. And we have this little snippet of this ancient science, and we've got enough to sort of now begin to reconstitute it. It can save humanity hundreds of years of figuring this out again and learning how to reinvent the wheel. We all breathe the same air. Apart from the elements known to our sciences, the air contains a great number of substances unknown to science, indefinable for it, and inaccessible to its observation. But exact analysis is possible, both of the air inhaled and the air exhaled. This exact analysis shows that although the air inhaled by different people is exactly the same, the air exhaled is quite different. The exercise I have on the Gurdjieff group of Toronto, the morning sitting, is an exercise designed to extract these higher particles in the air, which most people breathe out. So engaging in conscious breathing and three-brained awareness of breathing is one of the keys to understanding the second conscious shock, the third stage of human development. So let us suppose that the air we breathe is composed of 20 different elements unknown to our science. A certain number of these elements are absorbed by every man when he breathes. Let us suppose that 5 of these elements are always absorbed. Consequently, the air exhaled by every man is composed of 15 elements. 5 of them have gone to feeding the organism. But some people exhale not 15, but only 10 elements. That is to say, they absorb 5 elements more. And going back to the diagram over here, in order for Me12 to actually move to Fa, this has to be brought into play. The higher has to blend with the lower to meet in the middle. And if we do not have this substance already within us, we will never be able to have Me develop into Fa, no matter what we try with self-remembering. These carbons have to already exist within us, and through that three-brained breathing exercise, through conscious breathing, we can absorb these higher carbons so that this transformation can take place. These 5 elements are higher hydrogens. These higher hydrogens are present in every small particle of air we breathe. By inhaling air, we introduce these higher hydrogens into ourselves. But if our organism does not know how to extract them out of the particles of air and retain them, they are exhaled back. Do the morning sitting. That is how we begin to extract them. If the organism is able to extract and retain them, they remain in it. In this way, we all breathe the same air, but we extract different substances from it. Some extract more, others less. In order to extract more, it is necessary to have in our organism a certain quantity of corresponding finer substances. That is the carbons already present that we need to engage in this alchemical process. Then the fine substances contained in the organism act like a magnet on the fine substances contained in the air, inhaled air. We come to the old alchemical law. In order to make gold, it is first necessary to have a certain quantity of gold. If no gold whatsoever is possessed, there is no means of making it. The whole of alchemy is that process. Let me see if I can run through this quickly. All that has been said about work before in oneself, the formation of inner unity, and the transition from man number 1, 2, and 3 to the level of man number 4 and further pursues the same aim. What is called, according to one terminology, the astral body, this is essential, is also called in another terminology, the higher emotional center. Although here the difference does not lie in terminology alone, there are, to speak more correctly, different aspects. They are more different aspects of the next stage of man's evolution. It can be said that the astral body is necessary for the complete and proper functioning of the higher emotional center in unison with the lower. Or it can be said that the higher emotional center is necessary for the work on the astral body. For the 2 octaves to develop, a second conscious shock is needed at a certain point in the machine. And I'm just going to skip to the highlighted part. This effort is connected with the emotional life in a special kind of influence over one's emotions, not expressing unpleasant emotions, not identifying, not considering inwardly, is the preparation for the second effort. And he also defines the higher emotional center as working with hydrogen 12. And so we can come back over to this diagram and we can say that this, so 12 over here, this is the higher emotional center. So 12. So 12 has to develop in a certain way. We have to activate our higher emotional center in such a way that it can provide that shock to me 12, which can then provide the additional shock to C12, so that over here we can see the me 12 moves up and the C12 moves up. And by talking, so the higher emotional center, he equates with the astral body, with the Kesjan body. So it is the activation of the higher emotional center. It's work on the transformation and transmutation of our emotions. And going back to that phrase, he said, if the emotional, the octave of air does not have sufficient intensity, it doesn't fully develop all the way it should. So the second conscious shock somehow involves the higher emotional center. It involves awaking the higher emotional center, which is fueled by hydrogen 12, to clarify that emotional center, to stop the process of identification, to stop all of that. And I've run through a lot of material here. This is on YouTube, it's on Facebook now. Hopefully within a couple of hours, I will post it to YouTube. There's a tremendous amount of information here and understanding between last meeting and this meeting. This is the development of the human organism. Self-remembering, the conscious awareness of our eyes, ears, nose, and taste buds, receiving information, being aware that this is visual, this is auditory, this is olfactory, this is gustatory, while the sacred denying is on the sensation of self. That awareness of my body is the first conscious shock. And then the second conscious shock involves activating the higher emotional center, the transformation and transmutation of our emotions, and not identifying, not expressing negative emotions, and all of that emotional work that's contained within these teachings are ways of preparing and awakening and cleansing the human machine so that the higher emotional center becomes activated. We develop the Kesdjan body, and then that will have that effect on Me12, which will have the effect on C12, and allow the human organism to move to the higher state. I read through things quickly. It's a lot to digest. It's a lot. This is all contained in Chapter 9 of In Search of the Miraculous, the most important chapter of In Search of the Miraculous. It's all important, all the quotes of Mr. Gurdjieff, but that chapter especially. This is the ancient science of transformation. It explains this in a very, very detailed and incredibly concise way. It's all in there. And so we've run out of time. Thank you all. Sorry I had to rush so much. I didn't take my time to kind of slow down. I gave a lot of information to digest. Maybe we can unpack a little bit more of this next week and kind of work through some of the implications of it at a slower pace with a deeper understanding. So thank you for being here. And for those of you on Facebook, thank you, and YouTube, thank you. And bye now. And this will be posted again, on YouTube very soon. And watch it again. A lot of stuff.